really glad to be able to introduce to you Rebecca Brown this afternoon. Nearly anything good. She's been involved with just about everything good that's happened in the Seattle literary scene in the last X number of years. She's a terrific fiction writer, memoirist, essayist, author of numerous books, including The Evolution of Darkness, The Terrible Girls, The Dogs, A Modern Bestiary. She's been published by City Lights Books in San Francisco, HarperCollins, and other publishers. She's the director of the Centrum Foundation in Port Townsend, Washington. She's also professor at the University of Washington Bothell Poetics Program, and the receiver of many literary awards, including the Genius Award from The Stranger and the Lambda Literary Award for the Gifts of the Body. Please welcome Rebecca Brown.
Thanks, Larry. Thank you, Leonard. It's really great to be back here at Evergreen and reading for you folks this afternoon. I've been thinking about what you're doing in your Fictive Certainties class, which Leonard gave me a little head news on. And so I want to, I've chosen the things in my reading to kind of address some of the issues that I understand you're looking at in your class, which are considering questions of poetry, fiction, and knowledge, artifice, and its relation to truth. So I'm going to read from a couple of different genres in which I work, and to kind of maybe talk between the pieces a little bit about how different kinds of truth or invention are manifest in these particular pieces, and also a little bit about genres. So the first piece I'm going to read is called Shut Up. It's a manifesto. And as you know, a manifesto is a statement of kind of extreme belief or imperative, and very often in literary history, they're kind of, retrospectively, they're looked at as kind of ridiculous. That's sort of like someone is making a claim much bigger than they have any possibility to make. So I'm kind of playing with that notion of like overclaiming something. So here we go. Shut Up, a manifesto. I'm so sick of irony. I'm sick of nihilism and meaninglessness and everything that's hipper than thou or smarter than thou, or oh boo-hoo, my poor brilliant life has no meaning. Whose fault is that? And oh boo-hoo, language can't be trusted anymore. It can, damn it. And if you don't trust it, then shut up and do something else. Talk to someone whose stick isn't up their rear as far as yours is. Talk to someone who isn't impressed with your fascinating mind. Talk to someone who things mean something to, who needs things, including stories and poems and words, to mean something. Or better yet, listen to someone. Listen to someone who doesn't even think about language because they are thinking about how to feed themselves or their kids or find a job or love or not want to die. What I am trying to say is that language can work. It can be trusted and it can save your life. It can say things you want and say things that make you think and feel like maybe you're not entirely alone. That maybe somebody else is sort of like you and maybe decided not to blow their brains out, but stayed alive so maybe you can too. Language can also say things that are hilarious, that make you laugh till you double over, and realize that even if things are awful, sometimes they're also awfully funny. It can say things about beauty and truth and hope and love and even redemption. I want to read books I need to read. I want to read books that feed me, that go in my mouth and throat and down in my guts and nourish me or mess me up but feed me that way too. I want to read books a writer had to write, could not write, or else she'd go effing nuts. I want a book that will make me think or feel, even if it makes me feel shitty, or like I want to go out and strangle someone, or smash car windshields with a crowbar, or maybe instead do something decent or kind, or thank someone, or smoke and drink and have sex with people I shouldn't have sex with, or maybe even apologize for things I did to someone long ago. When I start a book and it seems like, oh, look how fascinating I am, I'm like, get over yourself. I'm like, shut up. Of course words can't be all you want. Of course words fail sometimes. What doesn't? Nothing. Nothing never fails. Nothing can bring back the dead, not even words. I mean, not really alive, like breathing and with their body and voice and hands so they could hold you again and you hold them too, but only try, which failures that words are, despite the things that words cannot do, are worth, when they are what you have, a little more at least than nothing. Words are what you do to hold your grief. Words can't express what it is to need. They cannot say how much you want or make the person you want to love you love you. Life is full of suffering, loss, and death, etc. You are not the first one who has known or tried to say this. You have tried and needed to. There was a time before you thought you wanted to give up. Do not give up. Words have also always known their limits. You also aren't the first one to know this. Everybody knows that words aren't flesh. Everybody knows our bodies end as love and our minds end too. Will you not know because you're arrogant, afraid? I also mean, of course language can lie. Of course it does sometimes, but whose fault is that? Words don't pretend what they are not. They know they're only gruntings, groanings inexpressible, a line in the dirt someone made with a stick. Not thing, not real, invented, abstract, standers in for, pointers toward the not by our flesh touchable we'd touch. Words are also, however, in their own dumb way, sort of things. The blur of the breath sucked over the tongue, the press of the tongue to the back of the tooth, the back of the cave of the mouth, the slur, the consonants click, the susurrus, the fricative slide, the uvular trill, the drawn-out vowel of oh, the pull of the breath inside, then down the throat, the wanting throat, the moist and warm and wet of it, the weight, the top of the back of the roof of the mouth, the palate, the tang, the tongue, the pulse of the vein on the side of the neck, the oil, salt, the saltiness, the cup at the top of the bone, the beating vein, the blue and the pulse and the vein of the neck, the rise of the chest, release of air, the hand on the sternum, the bone above the heart, the beating heart, the mouth and the tongue and the hand, the moving hand, the slip and the pliability, the catch of the breath, the cry as if surprised, though not. No, this was not surprised. It had been longed for, if not uttered, had been in some way said, oh, make me effable. The story of Babel is everyone talking to nobody understanding. The story of the Pentecost is everyone talking to everyone understanding. The word is a spirit arriving within and among, each one breathing alone, apart, and also part of all of us and one. The word isn't it, but says there is. It points toward what is. Words mean we are trying to say. They mean we think we mean. Books mean so too, or should. If you want to write something that doesn't mean, but is indifferent, indulgent, superior, snotty, or whines, don't waste our time. Please do not waste our time. Shut up. Leave trying to say we believe we mean to the rest of imperfect us. So I'm going to move from that essay about sort of standing up for words, abstract as they are, to another kind of essay memoir that starts off with really bare definitions of words. And this is from a book I wrote called Excerpts from a Family Medical Dictionary, which is a, in quotation marks, memoir, meaning it's a nonfiction piece. The material of it is about helping my mother die. It is not, however, a memoir in the sense that there's any way it's anyway resolved or comes to a nice arc. Basically, from the beginning of the book, you know she's going to die. The book is very repetitious, and it's basically just a series of definitions of words. There's not a lot of forward movement. So words don't lie, but sometimes they don't do more than just say or show. So, and this isn't thinking, I'm thinking in terms of your class about truth and fiction, because the next piece I'll read will be sort of a spin-off in this away from memoir. So the word here is unction, the act of anointing, as in medical treatment or a religious ceremony. A few days before my mother died, I said to my sister, "I want to prepare the body with you." We were in my mother's living room. Our mother was in her bedroom down the hall where she was dying. She was asleep or resting or whatever it was on morphine and Haldol and other drugs, the names of which I no longer remember. None of the drugs were to cure anymore. They were only to comfort. She lay in the bed in her room down the hall while my sister and I sat whispering in her living room. It was late at night, and though our mother was asleep and couldn't hear us, we acted as if she could, as if we might wake her. We might have once. She was always a very light sleeper, especially around her children. She was vigilant. So my sister and I were acting as we'd been raised, to whisper when we were near to somebody sleeping. We'd begun to whisper a lot in my mother's house. Before we knew how sick she was, when we talked to her docs on the phone, sometimes we'd whisper, "She picks at her food." We'd say, "Should I make her eat? The pain is still in her shoulder. Should I give her another pill?" When our relatives called early on, we'd whisper little triumphs. "She ate 4 bites of mashed potatoes today. She only vomited twice." Or, "We walked her out to the garden today." Later, when she was sick unto death, we'd whisper to them, "If you want to come see her, come soon." The night my mother died, my sister came into our room and said, "Chris," and I shot out of bed. I went to my mother's room and touched her face and her pulse, and I saw her face, and I said to my sister and to Chris, "She's dead." My partner, Chris, touched my mother and said she was dead. I don't remember what I did. Did I cry out loud or say something? Did I lean over my mother and kiss her? I don't remember. I remember my sister getting onto the bed and holding my mother and crying and saying, "Mama." When she got up, Chris lay beside my mother too and held her and thanked my mother out loud for loving her. I remember my sister, either with something she said or a gesture, asking, did I want to lie with my mother and hold her goodbye, but I couldn't. Her face was yellow and waxy and smooth. Her cheeks were flat and her eyes were sunk, and one of them was open. I tried to close it. Her head was shiny and almost bald, but with a little fuzz of hair where it had started to grow back when she stopped the chemo. It looked like a baby's, soft and white. For days, my sister and I and Chris, after she arrived, had gathered things for my mother. 2 petals from a bouquet from the boys, sage and basil and rosemary for remembrance from her garden. Betty had brought some mugwort from an herbalist in town who told her it would bring clear dreams to the dead. We'd found an old green glass pitcher with a cork on the top and an old bronze vase of my grandfather's. My mother's body was covered with sweat. We'd been changing her sheets and the nightshirt she was wearing several times a day, but she'd break into sweats as we changed them. Sweat would pour down her body. I didn't know how she could have so much when she hadn't been able to drink it all for days. We washed my mother with warm, clean, sweet-smelling water. I remember the bowl with the water in it, and my sister and Chris and I each dipping our hands or our hands in a cloth into the bowl, then washing my mother's skin. We took turns holding the bowl and took turns washing. Her body was hairless as a girl, and it was smaller. She had lost so much weight, and her skin was loose. But when we washed her, lifting her hand, her arm, her foot, her neck, she gave to us. The tension in her body, how it was stiff and clenched and could not bend or be turned easily the last days of her life. The twitching and the rigidness her body had had for days had been released. The doctors and the hospice workers had said she was past feeling, that the twitches and groans that came from her were involuntary. Her brainstem was only functioning at the very lowest level to make her lungs breathe and her blood circulate. They told her she was not aware and that her body could not feel anything. But it was hard to see her twitch and hear her throat and mouth make noises that sounded almost human, almost like speech, as if she was trying to tell or ask or beg us for something, for mercy perhaps. We washed our mother's body and we talked to her. Her body was limp and gave to us, and we washed her slowly and tenderly as if she could still feel us or feel us again. We washed her skin and told her that we loved her and we'd remember her. We thanked her for her life, for being good to us and kind, and we told her that her body's pain was over. We told her we'd take care of things. She'd worried about things when she was alive, that she had left a burner on or hadn't locked a door. She worried about her children, if we'd eaten enough or were warm and safe, if we felt cared about and loved. We told her everything was fine, that things were taken care of, that she could rest. Her skin looked flat and yellowish and felt beneath my hands like wax, still warm and soft and pliable. We turned her over and changed the sheets, then covered her with jasmine-scented oil. It was massage oil I brought to her one time. My mother had never had a massage before she got sick and didn't really want one at first, but she got used to them. Every night, whoever was with her, my sister or brother or me, would rub her shoulders and back and neck, her legs and arms and feet to help her sleep. I poured the oil in my sister's hands. Then Chris poured it into mine and hers, and we covered my mother's body with oil. The room began to smell so clean. Our hands were soft and slippery. I remember the touch of my mother's skin beneath my fingers and hands, the way she felt. We poured red wine into a cup and drank. Then my sister put her hand in the cup and touched her fingers to our mother's mouth and spread the wine along her lips. We covered her with flower petals and herbs we got from her garden. We tucked the charms her son and her grandson had made into her hands. We wrapped the clean white sheet and then her father's woolen blanket around her. We covered the flesh that had carried her, the body she had borne, that she had birthed us from, the body from which we had washed the final sweat. When this was done, we lay her down in her bed alone, as if she could rest until morning. So that's sort of memoir narrative, and obviously it's sort of related to that line in the essay about the manifesto about language and why write, and that line about words help you contain your grief, or words are a container for grief. And they also help you sort of explore, discover what you feel, even if you don't know it. And this next piece kind of takes off from some of these ideas about grief and death in the body and being aware of the dissolution of the body, but it's not a memoir. I'm guessing I'll call it a monologue or prose poem, and it comes from a project a number of years ago. After my mother died, Nancy Kiefer, who's a Seattle painter, had a series of paintings, and Nancy and I had been talking about working together for many years, but it was kind of like, what would the project be? And so I went to her studio several times and looked at her work, and there was one body of work that was a series of like 100 teeny tiny little portraits, like this big, teeny tiny little portraits. And as they sold, they were all on the wall, and as they sold, they kind of disappeared. So it was a series of paintings of people, but they disappeared. And so this notion of who disappears and how became important to me. So I took a number of these images, and we made a book called Woman in Ill-Fitting Wig, which is Nancy's, these tiny portraits, and then my text. And so the piece I'm going to read to you is called Old, and it's from this little picture here. You guys probably can't see it out there, but the image itself is this tiny, and it's of a little baby, and he's wearing a little blue hat, and he's got this kind of scarf, not a scarf, but like almost like a rough neck that you'd see like in a Dutch painting or something. So on the one hand, it looks like a baby in kind of a cute adult costume, but the baby is blue. So here's this piece called Old. He knew a lot. He knew too much. He knew it all too soon. He was old before his time. He was born old. He never had a chance. Before he was born and his mother dreamt of him, she dreamt of an old man. A wise old man, it's true, but old, an old man. Toothless, bald, unseeing, skin as thin as the skin of a worm, skin you could see light through. He told her things. He said, "Don't be afraid. Don't try to fight. That's just the way it is." He said, "I know it won't be easy, but I know." He knew she'd try to fight. He knew she'd try to make it different, but he knew it couldn't be. He was already old. His unseeing eyes were open. It wasn't wide-eyed wonder. It was open-eyed recognition, regret. He saw too clearly what it was. He saw how things would be. He saw from the start. He couldn't talk. He wet himself. He drooled. Then after a while, he stopped doing that for a few years, for 70 or so. Then gradually, one by one, began to do it, to be it again. Bald, toothless, speechless, drooling, wet, and dumb. Sometimes he whined. Nobody knew why, or they pretended they didn't, as if there was one particular thing, some specific momentary thing, and that they could do some specific thing in regard to hunger, wetness, dryness, or movement. But it wasn't a specific thing. It wasn't something as small as that. It was everything. It was his condition. It was the way he was. It was the way it was. He did it again until he left. He made messes he couldn't help, and everyone else around him had to clean up. Some of them were good about this and did this lovingly, but others were callous and cruel, and he was lucky they didn't do to him what they did to some. The middle years were just an intermission between the times on either side of which were how it really was, how really he was, and that he knew from the start. He did not fight this. This made this somewhat easier for him. But not for her. She wanted it not to be that way for him. She wanted nothing bad for him. She wanted to protect him. She wanted him never to be betrayed, hurt, wounded, cut, or knocked around, which would have to mean that he would never love, be loved, or any of the rest of it, which after a while she realized was the only thing worth anything, hard as it was. So she let him. She let him go. She let him grow and grow up, and she saw him get hurt, cut, knocked around, betrayed by love and everything else, work, friends, family, home, the ground beneath him. Every winter, every time he or any old or young man fell, an earthquake once when he was living on the West Coast. This wounded her, and to a degree him too, on her behalf, but her, of course, more because of how she was. It was the lot of her that she wanted more for him than for herself. She wanted more for him than for anything. She wanted good for him. So he felt bad for her wanting good, impossible things for him, but he also knew from the start, because he was born old, that these things were. He knew that what was to be done was to go and grow and fall, be cut, wounded, kicked around, beaten and beaten down again, betrayed by others, by time, by the body, his body, which would return after the brief period of being upright on its own, relatively able to feed, walk, shit, and clean and take care of itself without assistance, to needing daily home care, 24-hour nurse like mother in the early days care, that this was the way at the start and at the end he was, and that all things were. So I'm going to move from those really sort of close focus visuals and voices to something that is more, bears more hallmarks of fiction, i.e. characters and setting. There actually is a kind of forward movement on it, I suppose literally. And this is from a more body of work I continue to work on now. It's called At the Delta. Oh, and I'm also reading it because I know that one of your texts is Anne Carson translating Sappho and referring to that. So there's something in this about it's almost like on a see-through template referring to some other stories and certainly other characters in fiction. So it's like writing that stands on top of other writing. And there's also a character in this piece that's a dog. And as Leonard mentioned, one of my early books is called The Dogs. And so now I'm finding characters from earlier work of mine is reappearing. So it's like a story that is after other stories. At the Delta. I'm on a raft on the Nisqually River. We've come out of the woods and I can see the open water of the Sound ahead of us. We're at the Delta. The water is brown but clean. It's just the soil that's been stirred up. The banks on either side are the same color. The river is slowly going out in swirls and slow, slow currents. I'm standing on the raft and holding a pole, dipping it in and finding the ground, then pushing off. I don't really need to do this much. We're moving with the current. So I can stand here in the air and sun and feel them. The banks are brown and muddy, and there are hoofprints of deer, I think, and scratchy little prints that must be birds. And beyond are meadows, grassy and green, but also with red and white and yellow flowers, and I think even some blue ones. Birds fly by and chirp, and there's an otter on the bank, and everything is perfect, kind, and quiet. My dog is on the raft with me. My dog. My dog sits quiet and obedient, content it seems. Its head is up and sniffing. It likes to be out in the clean, good air. It sits on its haunches, the sun on its back. I wonder if it needs a drink. But it's a smart dog, knows it can put its head over the side and drink. The water is brown but clean. I've got the pole in the water, pushing and stroking, lazy almost, call me Huck. The sun is clear and bright and the sky is blue. I feel pressure on the pole and look down and see the water churning, then churning more, unhappy, almost rumbling. There are black things in the water, but things I barely glimpse, and a faraway sound, then round and black. The top of a tire somebody's junked, the back of a fish or two, but then there's more, then more. It can't be sharks. A bunch of eels? I hate them even more, although I'm less afraid of them. It's not. That faraway purr sound was my dog, rumbling low and worried in her throat, her trying to wish them away and warn me and control herself. She gets it even worse than me. But all for naught. We're in a churning pack of them, of dark black backs and shiny, dripping teeth. The back of my dog is shivering. Her teeth are bared. She's both afraid and gearing for a fight. I don't know what I am. Suddenly on the shore, I see a man. Maybe he's been there all along, but only now I see him. He's standing there alone, and though he's far away, it feels like I see him close. I see his eyes. He looks at me, across the water, seeing me as if he's saying, "Come." My dog looks up. She sees him too. Her ears twitch and she whines. She wants to go to him. She looks at him, then back at me. Although she wants to go, she will not leave me. Around us, in the churning froth, a million dogs are swirling like in Jaws. There's not that famous music, though it's quiet. What I can hear is water, still, but moving slowly underneath the way they churn. What I can hear is the less than whine my poor dog tries to hide from me. She wants us both to go to him. If we go in the water, they will get us, and before we get the chance to drown, they'll tear us limb to limb. It's almost like I feel their teeth already. The man on the shore is watching us. He waits for me to come to him. In my head, I see that if I did, if I stepped off this pallet, and my loyal dog did too, and walked to him across the tops of the bodies of the terrible dogs, or if we even actually walked on water, this could happen. But I do not. I do not go to him. Why won't I go? I ask myself as he tells me, "Come," again, as if it's simple. Maybe it is. Maybe it's only a matter of lifting my foot from whatever shaky base it's on into the air above whatever shifts beneath, and then toward the place I think he is. But I do not. My dog is whimpering again, now more afraid, it seems, than me, but infinitely loyal. Despite whatever else she knows, she neither will forsake me nor abandon. I still don't understand how she abides with me. Thank you for listening. So if we have time for Q&A, I don't know if we do or not.
We do, but we do.
So, questions or comments, anyone? This is always my favorite part, the uncomfortable silence.
Well, I'll start with a first question. Rebecca, first off, thank you for really terrific reading and a wide range of modalities
Thanks, Larry.
in the text you read. Really great for Fictive Certainties to work through the epistemological differences and how you shape, how you think about knowledge and in these things. So my question is related to that. It's, you read from Excerpts from a Family Medical Dictionary, which is a book I've read and love, and you spoke about the expectations for what a memoir should be and how you try to frustrate or play with those expectations. What is there about the dictionary form in particular that appealed to you in that gripping personal circumstance of one's mother's illness and death? And how might that, and I'm just wondering how that speaks to the whole question of what fiction writing is as opposed to memoir writing, as opposed to writing a dictionary.
Because I learned how much time do I have on that one. So when I spoke about this book, being nonfiction but not a memoir. And the question is something about playing with a memoir form and working against it. For me, the notion of intent in form is a really, really tricky one, because when I'm working, I don't sit down with a set idea of a form I'm working in or towards. I'm working with material, and it's very mysterious and very organic. This particular book came out of, diary entries and just scribbles and how am I gonna, and just needing to write this stuff about my dead mother. And so I just wrote all this stuff, and what am I gonna do with it? I don't know. And then, but clearly there wasn't, I didn't have I think one of the things about the memoir form is, at least in contemporary American writing, is this notion of starting with a question or a problem, and then going through something and learning about a past or going through some struggles and ending with, an answer or a solution, even if the solution is this is unsolvable. But there's some kind of forward movement of narrative arc. There's something we don't know, and then something that we we do know. Or some, what, now I know. I started off grieving and divorce, but now I've ended up not grieving and I have a boyfriend. Or I started off hating the fact that I had this illness, but now I've learned that people love me through this illness, just something like that. Whereas I didn't, the only narrative in my mother's death was she was alive, she was dead. And in writing the book, it's like every memory was like aware of the death. Like every memory was like, she's alive, but she's gonna die. She's gonna lie. And so there's no sense of like suspense. And so in that sort of overall sense, there's no forward movement. There's no resolution. Whereas, so I can see that retrospectively. When I was working on the book, it was like, what do I do with all these things? And then literally, I was in a junk store one day, and I picked up something, and it was like one of those Time Life books. It was like Family Medical Dictionary. I picked it up, and I went, this is it. And it was literally like, this is it, Family Medical Dictionary. This is what I'm doing. And I went through, and I copied down a bunch of words. And so the form was given to me from the outside. And indeed, that kind of finding a form in almost all of, I think in all of my books, the form has become apparent to me really near the end of the process or even after the process. And that, of course, is one of the difficulties in teaching creative writing, because people are like, what's my form going to be? And I'm like, fuck if I know. Fuck if I've ever known until it was done. So, so I didn't go in with an intent to subvert a narrative, but I knew that I was uncomfortable with the term memoir when one of the people who wanted to publish it said, this is a memoir. It's like, no, it's not. And it's like, is it a novel? It's like, no, it's not. And it's like, what is it? It's a book. Or it's like, it's a dictionary. What do you mean a dictionary? Well, the title says dictionary, so that's what it is. And people are like, yeah, but is it a novel? No, it's a, but I don't know. So, was there something else to that? I mean,
No,
there's a lot of other stuff.
That was fantastic. Are there other questions? Yes.
I had read your piece on irony in The Stranger a few weeks ago, and really enjoyed it and appreciated it.
Oh, thanks.
I've noticed that trend in more current books, movies, even music, that there's just this lack of feeling. And I was wondering if you had any theories on why that is, if it's just a fear of emotion or if it's a backlash against something else.
I don't know that I have like theories about it, but it's certainly something I've observed. And I think, and for me, there's, I'm a total romantic with a capital R, like Shelley and those kind of people. Or that, not like I'm like Shelley, but like this sense of like urging, like big, like what's the cosmos kind of thing. And very much about like feeling. And I think one of the things in both some parts of American culture, certainly intellectual culture, and certainly in some parts of academic culture, there's a thing about like this gross out idea of like sentimentality, like it's really gooey, and throwing out sentimentality, which to me seems like an affect of emotion. It's like performing for like America's really into performing grief. It's like somebody dies that you've never heard of, but you're just like sobbing in front of the TV cameras, like bringing the flowers. It's just like, I had a cousin one time who was blonde, like that girl who has died, whose name I've forgotten. I don't know the state, but I'm like, I feel so much. And you're just like, fuck you, shut up. And so there's like this reaction to this performance of gooey sentimentality. And I think the problem is that therefore we throw out sentiment. You know, it's like genuine feel. I'm being completely judgmental and pejorative here. But so there's a sense of like, if you feel it, you're making it up, or if you feel it, you're not very smart. And, or you feel so much that you've got this kind of like, but I can't even say it. So there are all sorts of reasons that I can see that sentimentality is troubling, and that different kinds of ironic stances are useful to sort of counteract that. But I think there is a danger in, therefore, doing away with, you know, the importance of the heart. And if there's a theory, I mean, I just in terms of literary history, there's like, you know, the man of feeling in, you know, British playwright, in British theater history, and then there's like sentimentality. It's kind of like feeling decays into something. And so I think there's part of us that are like, oh my God, I'm not going to be that person who's like creating this huge emotion for the camera or for someone else or for, or even in the memoir boom. You know, my friend Ann Finger, an acquaintance of Ann Finger is a memoirist, and she's like, I don't know, she got, I don't know if she's like polio or physically disabled or something. She's got this whole rap about like the memoir thing. It's like, okay, terminal illness and abusive father, and I will raise you too. Okay, terminal illness, abusive father, mixed race, handicapped. Okay, and I'm going to raise you 3. And this thing of like whose story is worse that we're kind of in love with. And so there's also a reaction against that. So I think irony can be important, but it can also be like too much of a reaction. And if you read the other piece by my friend Tricia Reddy in there, I thought it was an amazing piece about the need for irony and who needs irony when. And I'm blathering now, so let's somebody ask about something else, and I'll just bore you with that. Thank you. Anyone?
Yeah, Alec has a question.
Yeah, I have a question about. You can't even hear me through this, can you?
I can hear
you
you
can?
without that thing.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that thing's working. Anyway.
It's working.
Okay.
Question about working from a painting.
Uh-huh.
And what that process is like, and whether other forms of art all become words to you, or whether a painting sits in itself without words to you, or whether you automatically are sort of, the words are magnetized out of you toward it, and what that, you know, what that's like to work with.
I love that idea of words being magnetized out of one. That's a really cool idea. You know, sometimes, let me backtrack a little bit. Last summer, I curated a visual art show on the theme of devotion at the Hadrian Gallery in Seattle, at CLU campus. And I wrote an essay about devotion. I was like, what is devotion? And I was like parsing it in my mind, word devotion, blah, blah, blah. But I finally came to this thing, at least for me, devotion is like doing something that's not mediated by words. It's not mediated by, I'm going to figure it out. It's like being present and looking. And so there's some ways that like the most engagement with me in something visual is to like be engaged with on the level that there's no words there. But I don't know if I understand through words, but I certainly process through words a lot. And in some ways, words are just a way for me to approach something or try to decipher or make something my own. And certainly in the case of working with Nancy Kiefer on Woman in an Ill-Fitting Wig, and then in other projects I've done with other visual artists or responding to visual art, really any kind of ekphrastic art, is there's something about, because the visuals have done something, then I have more freedom to do something else, right? And so there are ways that in, like the piece I read you about Old, there was ways I could like be right in the, from my mind, like right in the psyche of this creature without having to describe, I don't know, the visuals, I guess. And there's also a way that in my sort of collaboration with visual artists, like Nancy is a friend of mine now, and an extremely neat person. And I wrote this piece, and she didn't sort of say, well, don't do that. But she did tell me after I'd written the piece that actually this portrait of the baby is actually a really loving, happy portrait. And the family has this, isn't our baby cute? And I'm like, oh my God. Rebecca's like, oh my God, it's like the picture of death. And so there's something about like, there's ways that words pin things down. They clarify them, but they also pin them down. And so I'm really aware of both hopefully illuminating something when I write about it, but I'm also aware that I'm diminishing it. And there's also something like, it's a little bit of my thought about, creative and critical writing. It's like if I could really, really, really write what that painting is doing, like it wouldn't be a painting anymore. Like if the painting's done, it's like it. And so my writing towards it is just a way of trying to like, I don't know, hold hands with it, but I'm not going to become it, Stop me before I natter again. Anyone else?
Other questions? Yeah.
In your manifesto, you use words like and etc.
Right.
And that kind of goes back to like not wanting to pin things down.
Yeah.
And so those words are like more meaningful to you than meaningless. And I
Right.
don't know, I would like to, those words perplex me kind of. So.
Well, it's they're written in the text, and partly those words that ellipsis, those appear in the same group of sentences where the words love capitalized, redemption capitalized. I mean, all these like big, heavy-duty words. And there's something about a writer now in the 21st century coming to sort of say, well, like redemption. And you can't, for me, it's hard to just approach it and sort of say redemption. And so you have almost this kind of apologetic, like, shut up, da-da-da. I actually want to talk about redemption, which, of course, is an ironic gesture, right? To do that on the page is to sort of apologize for the whole point I'm trying to make. And so those are chosen really, really consciously. And I do that a lot in my work. Not a lot, but this essay is not the only place where I use or where I juxtapose a word like crap in the same story as a word like prithee, and just playing with, you're in one world, but you get these like drops of longing for another world. And so that sort of embarrassed admission of longing for these old things like capital Love hope, capital L love, capital H hope, capital R redemption, and you've got to kind of apologize for them. It was really pretty intentional there. Yeah, and it's sort of an ironic, preemptive, self-critical strike. So for which I proudly apologize. There you go. Thanks for noticing that. Anyone else?
Rebecca, you had that really wonderful, exquisite evocation of the sensuality of the human voice in the manifesto.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask about the level of sense and sensation in your writing. At the same time, there's not that it's a contradiction in any way with sensation, but I think there's a real explicit or at least implicit religious content in your redemption is the word you were just speaking of. Or in the manifesto, you speak of the Word.
Right.
In the beginning is the Word, of course, but you speak of the Word as the Spirit that arrives among us.
Right.
The piece from Excerpts from a Family Medical Dictionary, the word is unction.
Right.
It's an extreme unction and this kind of ritual around the body of your dead mother. I think in each of the pieces is a kind of at least implicit religious content. So I wanted to ask you I know it's a huge question, but to ask about sensation and its relationship to a religious feeling.
Yet, I'll try to do this in 3 parts, but I'll probably forget the second and third once I start on the first. Okay, so the thing about sensation, there's a lot of my use of language and sentence forms is very close to the ground. It's very Hemingway, almost monosyllabic, a lot of the sentence forms. And it's very much about it's like how a baby mind understands something, this and this and this. And it's very, simple, like the simplest way. And not even lots of adverbs and stuff. And so there's something about like trying to be really empirical, close to the body and the senses. And there's also this real sense of like capitalizing those words, love, hope, redemption, or turning simple actions, or either turning simple actions or seeing simple actions as something above. It's like the body and. And those things have gone on in my work a lot. Like, or the book, The Gifts of the Body, which was published in 1984. There's a way that, and that's a book about physically helping groups of people die, and it's almost like devotional meditations on bodily attributes, whether it's, meditating on what is hunger, meditating on what sight is, meditating on what speech is. And so there's a really sort of devotional quality to looking at these things. And as far as the gifts of the body was also, there's a passage in the New Testament where it talks about the gifts of the Spirit. And so it's like really very consciously playing with that, referring to that text in the same way that, like, being on a river, on a raft, it's like Huck Finn. And so it's just a really overt reference. And there's also a way that I think in some ways in the West, or maybe in a lot of sort of traditional religious sensibilities, that the body and the longing of the body and the longing of the spirit are like at opposites. But really, since I was an undergraduate and did a course on Christian mystics, and certainly in Christian mystic tradition, and a lot of female writers, there's this real thing of like all of this sort of deep sort of spiritual longing for the cosmos, much of it is expressed in these really like physical graphic terms, like this is a castle, like Teresa's interior castle. It's like the castle's like, it's got this many facets, got this many rooms, this is how the light plays, da-da-da. Or Julian of Norwich is like, I'm not just looking at Jesus, man, I'm looking at the wounds. I'm looking at this kind of color and this. And so this real like just close visual focus on a physical thing as a means to understanding or expressing something bigger. So, and not that I set out to imitate those people, but there was something that's like, oh, this kind of writing exists. And throughout my work, I mean, one of my early stories is called Forgiveness, and it's about someone who cuts off her right arm and gives it to somebody else. And so throughout my work, there's, the body is a physical site of like, you eat, you drink, you live, you die, but it's also this metaphorical site of like, oh, I gave my heart to you. And there's a story, it's like someone's like, okay, here's my heart. Or like, oh, I give my right arm. And so it's like, so those images are there. And certainly me, in recent years, coming to sort of think about the acts of writing and acts of art making as acts of meditation or prayer, for lack of another word, which is just, devoted attention to something. You spend a lot of time and maybe you'll understand something, or at least you'll just pay attention to it. So that's definitely there through the work.
Well, Rebecca Brown, thank you so much
Okay,
for coming
thank you
to
guys.
Evergreen and doing this reading.
Thanks so much. Thanks.